Life is complex.
So is our mental health. It cannot be understood by diagnosis alone.
Our philosophy is treat the person, not the mental illness.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Humanizing Mental Health. I'm Jeremy Alcorn. I'm flying solo today. I'm here today with Natalya Barikowski. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jeremy. So excited to have this conversation with you.
Yes, I've been actually quite eager to have this conversation for a while because you walk a very interesting line that I think is missing in our world. I'm just going to do a little bit of an introduction, talk about what it is that hooked us into wanting to talk with you. And so as we've done in the last few episodes, I'll give a little bit from the information that was sent to us. I'm requesting for you to come on our show. So she is a licensed naturopathic physician with nearly 2 decades of clinical experience in cosmetic dermatology and aesthetic medicine. And her perspective is one that rarely surfaces in mainstream wellness conversations. She's not here to promote treatments or trends. She's a clinician who spent years watching women achieve visible aesthetic results and still feel broken, still apologize for aging, still feel like they need to be fixed.
Yes. I hate that word fixing. I know we had that little conversation before we started recording. I think it's the biggest shift I try to really share with every woman that sits in my chair. Instead of looking at your face or body or whatever flaw that you think you have, stop thinking about fixing and start asking, how can I support myself? And that's the shift I'm hoping I can deliver today when we have this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that really jumps out at me is that often the idea here is dichotomized. As we were talking before a little bit off camera, we're talking about this idea that we don't need to necessarily demonize the beauty culture industry. Some of the tools or ways that they get to attract individuals is actually the problem. Do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Absolutely. I think that's a problem we really have. We have this, very segregated culture, one culture that wants to age naturally to the point that they don't even support healthy longevity because you give up on yourself kind of aging naturally. And then we have another culture that try to fix everything and don't even acknowledge the fact that we exist. So both really coming from the same emotion. We fear aging. It comes from that fear of being exactly who you are. So when we demonizing of certain elements, like for example, Botox or a filler, those are inanimate objects, they're just tools. So when we give emotion to the tools, that's when we start to sort of outsource our decisions of what those tools can provide for us. And when you step out and again, you start asking question, what does my body need? How do I support myself? And then you consider if those tools are actually needed or they're necessary in your life or your health.
Right. Now that makes sense. And I want to make sure that I have clarity as I articulate this. So the industry, there's lots of different interventions. The interventions in and of themselves are not necessarily good or bad. They have to do with the individual, what the individual is wanting to create in their life. The problem with that is if they try to somehow dishonor themselves along the way in recognizing that they're going to age, that they're not going to be 20 forever. And that's not something to be ashamed of. Now, those tools actually are not the tools I was referring to. I meant the way in which they grab their audience, the way in which they convince you that you need their products,
yes,
that you need to be different. And you mentioned that there's a couple different strategies that they lean into
yes.
that are actually problematic.
Yes. I'm sorry. I misunderstood your question, but you're right. It's a very important conversation to have. And I often ask my audience to kind of pause and envision any beauty commercial. And once you start kind of really deeply looking into the message, you understand that every single commercial plays on 2 very powerful emotions. It's either shame or fear or sometimes both. So we have those messages that basically tell us if you don't do it, you will lose it, or shame for you not caring enough. So when, again, we get those messages, and there's nothing wrong with wanting to have a haircut or buy a mascara or lipstick, but when you take it as a tool for feeling more attractive, that's when we totally lose our authenticity and we lose our agency, autonomy for making the choices. So there's nothing wrong, again, with a lipstick, but the pressure that you put on that lipstick to sort of feeling ashamed if you're not using it, that's really the problem we have with the aesthetic or cosmetic industry messages.
Mm-hmm. And you also mentioned off screen, you talked about a couple of key emotions that end up being the driver around what you're referring to. And I'm interested in having a conversation about that. You talked about fear and you talked about
Shame.
shame. Yeah.
Yeah, shame, precisely. Because it's really the message is, shame for you of not doing it. You feel like you're missing out. You feel like you're losing yourself. You feel like you are behind of everyone else. So often they do send you those images. Oh, look at those attractive women. They take care of this. There's one commercial that comes to mind early in the 20th century when beards used to be very fashionable. Gillette, which we all know make blades, could not get enough sales because they were selling it to males to shave their beards and mustaches. And back then, the facial hair were really popular. So their sales were plummeting. And then they come up with a brilliant idea for women who just kind of starting to learn how to wear pantyhose. They become more, kind of like a cost-accepted garment for women to wear. And they created a commercial shaming for women to have hair on their legs. And then here is a solution, we can give you a blade to shave your legs. And lo and behold, now, a century later, we all do the hair reduction on the legs. When for generations, women never shaved their legs until someone put this idea on your mind. It is shameful to have that. So that's like a really brilliant example we already have in, old commercial culture. But it's those two powerful emotions, they're big drivers, and they certainly make sales much easier.
Yeah, for sure. So tell me your concept. What is beauty?
I do believe that beauty comes from inside. Like one of the favorite quotes that I have is by Coco Chanel, and essentially it basically says that everybody else is taking, just be yourself. And her exact quote is, beauty begins when you decide to be yourself. And I know we repeat this over and over, and I always talk to my patients about this because often women come in and they want to have, I want to have lips like Angelina Jolie. I want to have a nose like, I don't know, whatever other popular person that is. And I always trying to explain them what makes every human face unique. And we really don't need to look like carbon copies of each other in order to be attractive. I mean, yes, there is a certain beauty standards, but there's also uniqueness in every human face. And ultimately, I believe that beautiful face, it's a healthy face. It starts with a healthy skin. If you don't have a healthy skin and you give yourself an Angelina Jolie lips, I would argue that person was not going to be that beautiful, because ultimately when we look at the stranger's skin, we intuitively start to create sort of judgments about that person based on their complexion. When they have unhealthy complexion, your brain already sends its subliminal messages, or maybe there's something wrong with this person. Like, I am not really sure what's going on. And then, yes, people might love your bubbly personality, but let's be honest, we do judge people by their appearance. And I think the beauty really comes from the internal care for yourself, of just staying overall healthy, getting a restful sleep, eating healthy diet, because that's just, you can carry it alone. It comes with the energy. It comes with your brightness of your eyes. And that's the sincere smile. And that's truly attractive.
Mm-hmm. Now, it's interesting because you combined a couple of different things. Like one is at a visual level, like the way that we appear. The skin, of course, our biggest organ on our body. And I think people often think of the skin as just what can be seen. But actually, skin is much more deep than that. There's layers. In fact, if it's okay, I want to connect something in here that I was really trying to find a way, and I don't even know if it's possible, but to be able to make part of this episode to have somehow incorporated a Russian nesting doll. because of course your history dating back to Soviet Russia, but also the layers that are inside of it. That you pull one and there's another and another and a smaller, and it's all of the layers that come together to create what it is that we see. But if you pop one, there's going to be something else inside, another layer of depth. And of course, our skin is like that because it has layers. But as that person, the whole person, kind of coming into what makes someone beautiful.
Yes. No, you're absolutely right. And I love that analogy of a nesting doll. And let's be honest, most of us, when we meet the stranger, we just showing our outer doll only, right? We're showing our representative. It's really rarely people can be authentic enough. So they really show their core. And to really say to the point when I'm trying to kind of like articulate what's truly beautiful, what attracts me, for example, to another human, it's when I see that authenticity. So I kind of see it all the way through those layers of a Russian nesting doll, and I see what the core is. And it's rare. And most people are not like that. Most people are very guarded, very polished, very fake, and speaking again about aesthetic medicine, overdoing it and getting the very frozen face that doesn't really move well. And while the person's trying to articulate with you, it's certainly does not provide connection. It doesn't provide that authentic feel for the person you.
Yeah, that's interesting because what you're describing is like there's surface level beauty, and lots of people actually have that. And yet the true depth of connection comes through the authentic use of self, through the authentic connection.
Right. But it also comes from self. And then the self-trust, it's not something that you get easy. It's something that you have to regularly practice. And it starts with always asking your body, how do I support myself? What do I do? Not from the selfish kind of level, oh, I come first, I don't care what everybody else do, but from the really selfless and caring like you would do to your smallest sister, for example, or your best friend. And most of us, especially women, we are not that great towards ourselves. We have a really loud self-critic. We don't treat ourselves really well. And we tend to outsource our decisions to cosmetic industry or to a friend or to any kind of external force. And that's really what I'm trying to, again, deliver and articulate. So one of the reasons why I wrote my book is to really helping women to at least be curious to establish that level of self-trust.
Yeah, totally. In fact, please speak to that. Your recent book. Please tell us about it. Tell us where we can get it. Tell us like the general structure of what it is.
The name of the book is When Beauty is Currency. So it does talk about all the pain points we have currently in the aesthetic industry. And at the same time, I do want it to first normalize the experience. Why in our age, in the Western culture, aging is painful for women. Because for many, many generations, we always equaled beauty to youth. And then if that's true, then what is, aging? Aging is bankruptcy because then you're losing your beauty. And shifting that point, of mind, embracing the fact that aging is a different transition into a different kind of a person and you can support yourself through all the stages. That's really the purpose of the book. And ultimately, it's a psychological shift. Again, the shift from fixing to supporting.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. As you're describing this, well, first of all, want to put out a shameless plug. That is, where can people get your book?
Well, the book is actually not published yet. So I keep talking about this, but I switched my publishers and it's funny to mention this. I have a really good friend who recently published the book and I asked her this question. I said, how do you finally stop editing? Because it's one of the things that I know you're laughing. It's one of the things that I have a terrible perfectionist personality. So I want everything to be absolutely perfect, which is great in aesthetic medicine because we are so fantastic and those tiny little attention to details. But when I asked her this question, she said, you never stop, you just abandoned. So I think I'm getting to the point of abandoning the editing project and finally submitting my manuscript. Ideally, I gave myself a deadline of submitting the manuscript in early September. So by the end of the month, which is coming fast. And once it's there, however long that will take to really have it available, it will be available on Amazon.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah.
Amazing. So it's ETA is still a little bit up in the air then.
Well,
We don't know
ETA, yes.
exactly when it's going to arrive.
Ideally would be, I would say, the latest early October.
Okay, there you go. So not too far out.
Not
Good.
too far out.
Good,
Yes.
good. So
Yes.
this is perfect timing.
Yes.
Get the word out. That's excellent. So I want to really kind of speak to a couple of specific things. You mentioned women in particular, and I think that there is a specific psychological process around value. I think that is for everybody, but there's a certain pressure for women in particular that as a man ages, there's a different process. There's this sense of like maturity that often comes with the aging. Even the salt and pepper beard is something that is appreciated. And for women, that's not the way society goes.
Unfortunately
Can you
not.
speak to that?
Yes,
Can you
unfortunately
speak to
not.
that? Yeah.
And I have a whole big chapter on it, basically talking about the history, because women for generations been sold into marriages and married off early, and they never had any financial securities or their own personal possessions. Even if they came from a wealthy family, the wealth was kind of transferred to the husband's name, essentially. And because of that, the only value, the true value the women possess is their appearance. And certainly the prettier girl was, for the most part, means that she will marry off better. She will get wealthier husband and things like that. And unfortunately, that mentality, that deprogramming haven't fully left us yet. Now, certainly in our 21st century, we have more independent women. We have women who build companies. We have women who sometimes make more money than the husbands do. And yet that little messaging is still there. So when she notices in her midlife, her youth is fleeting, she's seeing those lines, she feels like she's losing her value. And it's a shift. It's something that we should not be ashamed of having it. But yet once you become aware that this internal programming exists, kind of like similar to things like sort of messages we absorbed as children, and we know as adults, if we become aware of that deprogramming we kind of silently absorbed, now we can address it. And it's not to erase it, it's just to embrace it, and also kind of like appreciate yourself for having it, but also to say, this is not my message. It's a message that passed to me through generations, through culture. I don't have to believe it. I am still great at what I am, and doesn't matter what age, and I will make choices from what is good for me, how I support my body, how do I support my skin, and how do I want to age in my own terms.
Totally. As you describe that, then I also think about men and what their typical process is within the psychological experience of beauty. What is your experience with that?
And it's true, the men, for the most part, not afraid of wrinkles that much, because we see the men look more distinguished as they get older. They look like they have more experience. More mature men looks that typically they consider to be more attractive. They certainly start to take care of the skin more. They realize if they have healthy complexion, they also look more attractive, but they don't want to freeze their face like women do. Sometimes I do see men wanting to look bigger the better. So that's when we have that little bridge into body dysmorphia. And as much as I don't really treat the bodybuilding community, I still see some of them as my patients. And yeah, it's sort of a different drift. The women opposite, we also have the Ozempic obsession right now. And I have some of my middle-aged women that are getting too skinny, and you're trying to talk to them about bone loss and how, scary it is for their health. And sometimes it falls on the deaf ears, because unfortunately, there's a fascinating psychological phenomenon. We call it the perception drift in the aesthetic industry. It's when you fix on a certain flaw, your brain almost fragments. And that little flaw, whatever it's your body size or a wrinkle on your face or some sort of blemish, it becomes larger than it really is. And then you so focus on fixing the blemish, you don't know how to stop. And if you meet a provider, either it's aesthetic injector, plastic surgeon, or another trainer who's helping you to train to get bigger, smaller, doesn't matter, then you have two people who sort of feed into each other. And that's when people continue to drift. And they're no longer seeing the reality. They're just seeing the flaw they're continuing to fix. And that's when men can become, too big and then have health consequences as such. The women can lose too much weight and also have health consequences. That's where we see celebrities' faces who overdone plastic surgery or overfill their faces, because that's, practitioner, unlimited budget, and the fragmented brain all meet in the same space.
It sounds a lot actually like an eating disorder. Individuals then get into a frame of reference where they can't see anything but what they see is the flaws. And then they're rail thin. They're looking at the mirror, but they lack protein. So what is there is looks flabby, and so they still see fatness, and then
Yeah.
it just have
Yeah.
to
The
continue.
eating disorder is sort of a extreme version of this, but it's definitely the very similar mechanism. Yes.
Yeah, for sure. Because at the core, beauty is still a big part of that concept. The
Yes.
reason the person is deciding to no longer consume calories or to vomit or whatever is to try to look a particular way, a way that they think is the way that they can be
Yeah.
accepted.
Yeah.
Like, is that not at the core of much of this?
100% agree. But typically for people who have the true eating disorder or like a true body dysmorphia, there typically childhood trauma that follows it or leads to it. It typically something that made that person believe that they are fat, for example. That's why they just stop eating completely, because they're so deeply affected. There's such a strong emotion attached to that belief. To really help this person heal, you have to go back to pain and then to really help them to realize how false that experience was. I see it in a more of a milder version of it, not as traumatic in my patients. Just recently, last week, I had a patient who had a very, very tight kind of deviation of her nose, and she believed her nose was crooked. And I use absorbable sutures to make her nose appear straighter because it wasn't a crooked nose. It was just like a soft, we got it perfectly straight. And the difference was like literally 2 millimeters. We got it perfectly straight. And then when she came back for follow-up, she looked great. Her nose looked fantastic. And she was still saying, I think my nose is a little crooked. So I had to show her pictures to see how perfectly symmetrical that is. And finally, I asked her, I said, who told you that your nose was crooked? And then she started crying because then I asked who, and she remembered exact moment. She knew who the person was. She didn't have to tell it to me. But then I said, can you talk to this person? Is this person is still in your life?
Sure. Mhm.
And if you can't reach this person, you don't feel comfortable, then write them a letter. You don't have to even said it to them. Imagine their face in the mirror as you talking to
totally.
them. And
Totally.
that, it just takes that emotional back and then just release it
Mhm.
because it's not true.
In fact, I really appreciate you bringing up the idea of trauma. It is so much easier to understand trauma when there's extreme situations. Like we go, okay, why did Michael Jackson get so much, plastic surgery? Well,
Yeah.
because his dad called him Big Nose through
Yeah.
his life.
Yeah.
Like that totally makes sense. It's obvious. But for a lot of people, in fact, if you were to look across diagnosis and you were to actually dig into their life, and in all the years I've worked as a social worker, and like at this point in time, like thousands of people that I've seen, I've truly found that underneath every diagnosis, there's a story. Every single
Yeah.
one of them.
Very true.
Whether it's a big thing like someone being, physically abused as a child, or if there's other small t traumas, and it's a matter of the cascade that it falls down. Now, one of the things, of course, and within our conversation, and that you mentioned before, is one of the cascades that falls down is towards a position of perfectionism, and where does it manifest, right? Where does the perfectionism manifest?
Yes.
Is it in the writing of a book? Is it in I have to look a very specific way? And that's where I think you gotta the core of your message becomes so important. And that is we to a certain degree have to understand that there is no such thing as perfect.
Yes. Yes.
And
Yes.
in fact, if I could use a metaphor, friends of mine are optometrists. And so I got thinking as I started to learn some things from them. And that is people think that perfect vision is 20/20, but that's not the case. People can see better than 20/20. I got laser eye surgery and I could see better than 20/20 for a long time. In fact, almost every person that goes into an optometrist, the optometrist could improve their vision with glasses. Almost every person. And where does that thought experiment take us? It takes us to say there has to be something called good enough.
Yes.
And that's where optometry came. They came to a place of saying, hey, 2020 is good enough.
Hmm.
It's not perfect.
Yes. 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 And it's certainly something. So that kind of brings me to another point of this conversation. We're talking about the actual serious traumas people go through and then developing serious, shifts and misbeliefs in their life that significantly impact their life. But most people have that tiny little messages that we absorb as children because, before puberty, our brain is so raw and open. So anything that happens to you, any comment that's given to you, the child's brain absorb it as truth, and that doesn't understand the difference between a joke, the fairy tale, reality. It's all just truth. So when even your mom says something like, "Oh well, your one eye is bigger than the other," or whatever, some silly comments, or "your hair is really thin," and then that girl might remember for the rest of her life that her hair is not good enough, her eyes are weird and crooked, or whatever that thing is. And the comment was given as a joke. Maybe it was given as even with the good intentions that, hey, let's get you a better haircut. But that stays with us. And it really changes your perception. And perhaps it sometimes creates those things like a perfectionism. Like I grew up in Soviet Russia. You wanted to talk about my upbringing, right? So Russian parents back then, specifically in Soviet Russia, it was like Chinese parents. We had to be in multiple different schools. Like I was full-time in music school when I was growing up. So you go into regular school, you come home for a short time, and then you go back to the second school, which was music school. So that was constantly having the best grades ever. If I brought home anything less than the A, and it's not A plus, I will get scolded for it. Not necessarily punished, but still would be this frowning on their face, shaming that what you could be better. Was it done from the best intentions? Absolutely. My mother wanted me to be successful. She wanted me to have great life. She didn't want me to suffer the way she did. We were extremely poor growing up. But did it create the perfectionism in me? Yes, it did. Could it become maybe a little destructive at a certain point? It could. I mean, luckily, I've done a lot of internal work myself, so I recognize this in me as well. And after talking to my friend who says, after a certain point, you stop editing the book because you just abandoned the project, I just started laughing. And I realized that, yes, it has to be good enough.
And something very interesting then as you talk about this, and what it brings up is actually, once again, something that you said off camera. And that was in terms of how you're approaching people and how you came to a place in which you fundamentally enjoyed seeing the joy that you brought into other people's lives as you help them to be beautiful. And so I'm very interested in that part of your story, how you came to do what you do.
I will go back to your nesting doll analogy because I think it's really brilliant. Maybe I'm a little biased because I'm Russian and I love nesting dolls, but I think truly what I saw, and it started off with me just putting lipstick and mascara on people's faces, on women's faces. It's when you give that woman a mirror and her face just lights up. And then something inside her unlocks. And all of a sudden, she is happy with what she is. And in her personality, her inner core comes out. Her kindness, her joy, the sincerity, that willingness to open up and connect to the world. I had pleasure of having my clients inviting me to their weddings, their baby showers. And I had people that been coming to me for so many years because I think that helping to unlock that sort of internal freedom of being who they are because they're happy and then very confident of their external appearance, that's really what kind of drives me to continue perfect myself, my craft in aesthetic medicine. Because I went from being makeup artist into being esthetician of just doing cosmetic procedures into finally being a physician. So my tools had an upgrade, but the message is still stay the same.
What an interesting dialectic. Like on the one hand, the truth that if you can maximize your physical attractiveness, it actually will help you feel better. And also that it has to come from within, that it can't just be a mask on the outside, or else you're never going to be happy.
Yes. No, that's very true, because I'm sure some of the listeners listening to this conversation, and they probably can name some people who are very attractive and yet very toxic, and you don't want to be around them because essentially they did not unlock that goodness within them. I mean, maybe I'm an idealist because I do believe every person is truly kind. And then sometimes circumstances in life make you not so kind person. And often it comes from sadness and kind of like a bottled up a trauma within that the people never addressed. So when people truly cultivate that, again, beauty from within, then they unlock that authenticity and sincerity, and it improves their life because it makes better connections with the people around them.
Yeah, totally. It reminds me, as you're saying that, as people know individuals that are physically stunning. It reminds me of a 1990s country song. It was She Ain't Pretty, She Just Looks That Way.
Yeah, yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Because there's truly individuals that you go, I don't want that in my life.
Right.
Like the initial, sorry, this is a strange metaphor, but it's kind of like a fish that's swimming through the water, and then it's like, wow, there's a lure. Except they don't know it's a lure. They just think it's food.
Yes.
And then they hit the lure, and they're like, that's not a lure. That's not what I wanted.
Yes.
And you find that you get into a position with someone that you're like, wait a minute, what I saw wasn't what's on the inside, and I'm not interested in this.
Yes. I mean, that's unfortunate, true, but I always tell my children since they were little babies, when they have someone in their lives, either it's a child who took their toy or a bully in school, I always say happy people don't say mean things. So often the people who don't really have a great relationship with others and become sort of toxic people, they are the ones that are deeply unhappy inside, and it's a little sad.
Yeah, it does remind me actually of an experience I had. This would have been 20 some years ago. I spent a couple of years as a missionary, and so one of the other missionaries I met, he was from Norway, and he was a really beautiful person inside and out, and we frequented this burger joint, and I even remember the waitress's name. She was such a beautiful person, and in terms of physically beautiful, yeah, but there was like a sun inside her, that just glowed. And so there was like this additional attractiveness that you couldn't like somehow quantify.
Yes.
And I remember always teasing my buddy, his last name's Clausen. I always teased him. I was like, so because there's very strict rules, right? You're not allowed to have any kind of romantic connection. I always tease him about her. And then when he was leaving, he was going somewhere else, and the waitress's dad happened to be there, and he's like, oh, you need to come back and visit Jeremy. And I looked at him like, but yeah, there's just those people, right? There's those people that they just glow, and it enhances that sense of beauty.
Yeah. So that basically answers your original question. What is beauty? You just described that.
So then, what is your hope in the message you're putting out into the world? What is your hope?
I hope that every woman, when she will look at her reflection in the mirror, will discover her own uniqueness and her beauty. My hope that she will recognize and befriend her internal critic and would not spend so much energy to try to silence it, but to just kind of listen to it as a friend that might be sometimes giving you protective messages, but they typically not true. And hoping that every woman will truly find her self-trust and to learn to reconnect with who she really is.
Amazing. Once again, for our listeners, this is Natalya Borakowski.
You did
and
it.
I got it. I nailed it. I think I got it right the first time too.
You did, yes.
And names are so important, and I actually have name anxiety. I don't know if it's a real disorder, but when it comes to names, I'm like, I'm going to mess up the name. So,
that's why
that's part of my inner critic.
Perhaps you had some child trauma that somebody shamed you from saying somebody's name incorrectly. Come on, let's unpack it, Jeremy.
Okay. We ready? Let's see. Picture it. Let's see. Cardston, Alberta, 1978.
There you go.
And by the way, I do have to find this out because there's not many people in the world that I know that could answer this question. I know it's not directly related to our conversation, but being that this is a mental health podcast, I want to understand what it was like in Soviet Russia when the wall came down and freedom started to occur. Like,
I was in ninth grade, I believe, and I was confused. It was at some point, I remember we had this big celebration. We were taking off our pioneer ties, because I don't know if you've seen it, but in Russian uniform, we all wore those red ties around our necks. We called pioneers. And we were taking them off because we were teenagers. It was exciting. We were protesting against our rules and not wearing the uniform. We were able to take them off. And I saved mine for a long time because it was autographed by all the kids in my grade. And it was a big kind of like a rebellious celebration there. But once all the sister countries started to separate, it was really confusing. It was little, I wouldn't say lonely necessarily. It was just confusing. It was really strange to me because it felt like we were sold this story that we are all happy 15 republics joined together in this happy mission of, being a great country. And then as soon as the pressure was lifted for them not to be part of the republic, they just all start living one by one. That was really confusing. And you just realize of all the countries that said that they were your friends, there never were. And now they want. So I don't know. It was kind of like a little bit of a crash of childhood dream perhaps. I don't know. I remember I was really confused. That's probably the best
I
way
see.
to describe the
Yeah.
emotion there.
Because on this side of that Cold War, it was understood from us that everybody was living a hard, terrible life, behind the Iron Curtain.
No, certainly limitations. We didn't have all the American, prosperity, if you will. We didn't have all the choices, or how my husband calls like the refrigerator size of a small Volkswagen. So all the different chips choices my children have right now, but we were really happy, truly. Like my childhood was, I think one of the things that country did give us is the sense of pride, the patriotism of whatever that country was. And I'm not trying to say that Soviet Union was perfect. I was still a child. But for a child to have that pride and belief and love for the country, it's very important. It's just really gives you that sense of certainty. And once all of that was collapsed, we were a little lost. And when the perestroika happened and then we had the collapse of Russian ruble, that was scary times. But that time I was already in college. And you would go to a grocery store and there was nothing to purchase. Like everything was empty because literally overnight, over a weekend, the dollar went from like 1 ruble to $1 to 20 rubles. So like the currency basically was melting away, like all our savings, because my parents had a college fund for both my brother and I. It basically disappeared. So I can't even imagine their financial catastrophe that so many people experience. But sometimes it kind of reminds me perhaps of a forest fire. There's a lot of trees that die in it. And then once they die, they also open up more land to the new growth. And it's sad and it's devastating, and yet it was still possible. And again, it doesn't mean that Russia is a great country now. I think there's still a lot of things happening there politically I'm not even aware of because I haven't been part of Russia for nearly 30 years now. But
Yeah.
there's still a lot of opportunities happened when the Soviet Union collapsed. And
Mhm.
a lot of people who had that sort of a savvy personality, had the Western education, they opened the businesses and they made a lot of money. And I'm sure we all know some Russian oligarchs that basically crazy rich, one of the richest people on the planet. And that's all was born from that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for going on a little bit of a side quest with me.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. So, in terms of kind of pulling a conversation together, I always like to do a reflection at the end of our interviews. And so I'm just really wondering what your kind of big picture takeaways, the things that stand out from this conversation from you.
One of the biggest things, it's your nesting doll analogy, because it just really kind of struck me deep again, probably because I love nesting dolls. I grew up with them, but ultimately just helped me to realize a lot of things about myself and the way that I often value people. because that's that authenticity of being able to really see what this people core is, the core of that nesting doll. It really helps me to see their true beauty and establish that deep connections with others. And unfortunately, again, to realize that how many of us are so superficial and all we see is just glossy outer corner, and then that's really not what that person is. And it's unfortunately also what we promote by cosmetic industry, that very glossy appearance, and we forget to cultivate the inner beauty. So I think that's probably the deepest message we can give it to our listeners today.
Totally. And for me, that absolutely jumps out as well. Like the Russian nesting doll, I was over and over and over going, I got to fit this in somehow, because, it resonated so much with having someone that came from Russia to be able to talk about those layers. And for me, that to be able to have a conversation with someone that works in the cosmetic industry that is helping people through these strategies to create greater physical beauty, to hear that person say, we need to work at this at a much deeper level. I cannot somehow magically make you look like this and look like it forever. That's unreasonable. And so understanding what does beauty look like across your lifespan, and how do we find that from our inner space, I think is a really powerful message.
Yeah. Well, you articulated beautifully too. I have to put it in my book now.
Wait, you're done though. I thought you're done.
You
No, wait. In the book, you got to work in the Russian nesting doll.
I have to now. Absolutely.
Well, Natalya, thank you so much for being with us here today. And on that note, we'll wrap it up. I'm Jeremy Alcorn, signing off.
Thank you for joining us today. We hope that this message has been as meaningful to you as it has been to us. If you're looking for help, you can find us on Facebook at Humanizing Mental Health.